On February 6, 1981, a group of armed rebels launched an attack on Kabamba military facility in Uganda. The goal of this attack was to steal some military weapons from the facility's weaponry. Although this attack was not completely successful, the rebels were able to leave the facility with some weapons. The attack marked the beginning of Uganda's civil war. For the next 5 years, this group of armed rebels, which became known as the National Resistance Army, waged a war against the oppressive regime of Milton Obote. The armed rebellion eventually prevailed, and the leader of the rebels was sworn in as Uganda's president on 26 January 1986. And to describe his commitment to liberate Uganda from the oppression of dictators, the man wrote a book titled The Problem of Africa. He knew perfectly what the problem was and vividly described it in his book when he wrote that the problem of Africa in general and Uganda in particular is not the people, but leaders who want to overstay in power. Ladies and gentlemen, he has been in power for 39 years now, 6 presidential terms in office. But I guess 40 years is not that long, because by the time Uganda's Yoweri Kaguta Museveni's tenure will elapse, he will have led Uganda for exactly 40 years. There are only 2 leaders in Africa who have stayed for that number of years: Paul Biya of Cameroon, Teodoro Obiang Mbasogo of Equatorial Guinea. All of them have been in power for over 40 years. Even the most revered Lee Kuan Yew understood that a man can overstay his welcome. He did one of the most remarkable turnaround in 31 years and then stepped down. What are these African dictators doing in power for this long? You may think they are building a haven for their citizens, but I kid you not, their country are in the worst condition ever. And if they are not, it has little to do with their president. They are truly the problem of Africa. But how Museveni went from defining Africa's problem to becoming one is a journey that will surprise you. This is a story of sacrifice, patriotism, and greed. It is a story of how one man captured a nation on the verge of collapse, liberated it from the clutches of dictators, and then converted it into a dynasty. Today, we tell you the surprising mixed legacy of Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. Before I proceed, I kindly ask that you like this video and subscribe, as this encourages our work. So, who is Museveni in the first place? With Museveni, nothing is certain. Not how long he will stay in power, not even his date of birth. However, the man is estimated to have been born on September 15, 1944. His father was Nzi Amos Kaguta, a cattle rearer in the Mpororo Kingdom, and his mother was Esteri Nganzi, a housewife who took care of the children and the home. Not much is known about his parents, but according to Mwalimu Nyerere, Museveni's father was a soldier who served in the King's African Rifles. He was among the 7th Battalion. So when Museveni was born, his father's relatives and neighbors would refer to him as the one whose father was a Museveni, which means the one whose father was among the 7. And that is how he got the name Museveni. Shortly after his birth, his family migrated to Ntungamo due to the injustice faced by black people from the British colonial rule in Uganda. It was a common colonial practice in Africa to seize lands from locals, but the British had little regard for the King's African Rifles veteran. So Nzi Amos Kaguta migrated further to Ntungamo, where he settled his family. Museveni began his formal education at the Kiamate Elementary School. After completing his elementary education, he proceeded to Mbarara High School to continue his secondary education, and then completed his high school education at the Intari Secondary School. Due to his level of political awareness at the time, he chose to go to the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania instead of the renowned Makerere University in Uganda. He knew that the University of Dar es Salaam was a hotbed of Pan-African and Marxist political ideas, and he chose that. Museveni was a student of economics and political science at the University of Dar es Salaam. He studied under the popular political leftist Walter Rodney. Under his supervision, he wrote a paper on the applicability of Frantz Fanon ideas on the revolutionary violence in post-colonial Africa. Museveni was a radical. He was among the group of students who formed the popular student union called the University Student African Revolutionary Front. For a man against overstaying in power, he was elected the chairman of his student movement, and he remained the chairman until he left the university. He has been a dictator since day one. It just didn't occur to many maybe even to himself. While still a student of the University of Dar, Salaam, he led a delegation of USARF to Frelimo-held territories in Mozambique, where they received military training on guerrilla warfare. In Mozambique, he met Eduardo Mondlane and Samora Moses Machel. These men remained his political mentors and heroes from then on. It was his contact with Frelimo that exposed him to guerrilla mobilization tactics of rural villages, and these contacts remained invaluable to him during his later years. In 1970, Museveni graduated from the University of Dar es Salaam and was offered a position as research assistant in the office of the President of Uganda. He joined Milton Obote's government for a brief period in Kampala, although he confessed to having a distrust for the government of Obote. And in 1971, while Obote was on a visit to Singapore for a Commonwealth conference, Idi Amin staged a coup and overthrew Obote's government, declaring himself the President of Uganda. On that 25th of January 1971, Amin dissolved the parliament, which left Museveni jobless. So Museveni fled to Tanzania, and that is when his life became even more interesting. Within 48 hours of Amin coming to power, Museveni ran to Tanzania and started courting President Nyereri's support for an armed struggle that would topple Amin's regime. However, President Nyerere was not interested in any kind of liberation movement, which does not entail the installation of Milton Obote as President of Uganda. This disappointed Museveni, but he was not deterred. From then on, Museveni remained in exile, mostly in Tanzania, sometimes in Mozambique. It was this period that he began mobilizing exiles to fight and overthrow Idi Amin in Uganda, and this period also when the guerrilla mobilization skill he had learned from his visit to Frelimo became most useful. He later took part in the abortive raid organized by Milton Obote to overthrow Idi Amin, which led to a peace agreement between Tanzania and Uganda. The agreement was called the Mogadishu Agreement, and it denied the rebels the use of Tanzania's soil to launch an assault against Uganda. In fact, the agreement had both countries withdraw their soldiers 10 kilometers from their borders. In 1973, Yoweri Museveni founded the Front for the National Salvation and trained members in guerrilla warfare with support from Tanzania and Frelimo. Museveni had such massive support from these countries because by this time Idi Amin was growing increasingly unpopular in East Africa and across the entire continent of Africa. He was becoming increasingly notorious, and his policies posed a huge national security threat to some East African countries, especially to Tanzania. Although a peace agreement had been brokered between the two countries, General Idi Amin still wanted to capture the Kagera region in Tanzania, claiming that the Kagera River should be the official border between Tanzania and Uganda. This mistake will eventually cost him the grip on the presidency. Perhaps this was a good thing, because no nation deserves such a brutal leader. I have a full story on the brutal regime of Idi Amin. Make sure you get to see the complete story of Idi Amin and the Ugandan-Tanzanian war. Back to the story. While Idi Amin was growing unpopular in Uganda, Museveni was building his army of rebels. He was recruiting exiles, training them in guerrilla warfare, and organizing resistance operations. He was just waiting for the right opportunity to strike. That opportunity came when Idi Amin launched an attack on Kagera with the aim of capturing the region and overthrowing the government of Julius Nyerere in Tanzania. All the years of mobilization and training will now pay off for Museveni. In October 1978, Idi Amin's troops invaded the Kagera salient, initiating the Ugandan-Tanzanian war. In response, Nyerere ordered the Tanzanian People's Defense Force to counterattack. For Museveni, the right time had come, and he was just waiting for Nyerere to say the word go. Nyerere ordered the Ugandan dissidents to be mobilized to join the war. Idi Amin had drawn the last straw, and the Tanzanian president was ready to sponsor an opposition that would take over power. After a discussion with Obote supporters and Museveni's Fronosa in December, Nyerere attacked Museveni with Brigadier Silas Mayunga, who was the commander of Tanzanian People's Defense Force. Two sides fought together until 1979, when General Idi Amin was forced into exile. While the battle was going on, there was a series of conferences, some of which were initiated by President Nyerere himself to discuss the political future of Uganda and its leadership after Idi Amin. One of those conferences was the Moshi Conference, which brought together various anti-Amin rebel groups and eventually led to their unification. The united oppositional rebel groups was one called the Ugandan National Liberation Front, and Yusuf Lule was elected its chairman. Museveni was disappointed with the outcome of this conference. He was an ambitious young rebel, and he felt that he and his followers did not have enough representation. Considering the work he had put in, he probably wanted to be at the forefront. However, when Amin was ousted, Uganda was ruled by a presidential commission in the interim, pending when elections would be held. The commission consists of Yusuf Lule and the chairman of the UNLF. The other two were Godfrey Binaisa and Polo Mwanga. Museveni served as the Minister of Defense, the Minister of Regional Cooperation, and the Vice Chairman of the Military Council. In 1980, the first elections were held since the pre-independence election that brought in Milton Obote. In this election, Obote won and was sworn in as president. Museveni was dissatisfied with the election result. He accused Polo Muwanga of rigging the elections in favor of Obote, who was his close associate, and he immediately retreated to the bush and began organizing another rebellion. Milton Obote had led Uganda for 11 years before Idi Amin came, and here he is again clinging to the clutches of power. When will he let go? For Museveni, it was not a question of when. The real question is, will he? This was the problem of Africa, and he was determined to be the solution. It was not even a question of electoral fraud. Uganda had to be liberated from the brutal hold of dictators. Was it his ambition, or was it sacrificial empathy for the people of Uganda? Well, we'll see. But whatever that was, it soon set Uganda into an unnecessary civil war which left the country and its poor citizens in ruin. The war started on February 6, 1981 with an attack on the military facility in Kabamba. Museveni and a number of rebel groups, including those loyal to Idi Amin, united to form the National Resistance Army with the goal of overthrowing the Obote government. On that morning of 6 February, Museveni commanded a group of 42 soldiers with 27 guns and pistols into the Kabamba military barracks. They went there to loot weapons to support their war. Although they met with fierce resistance, they managed to leave the barrack with some weapons, and the attack marked the beginning of the Ugandan Bush War. This civil war ended the lives of over 100,000 Ugandans and displaced over 2 million poor citizens of Uganda. After 5 long years of fighting, Milton Obote was overthrown in a coup by his army general, Tito Okello, in 1985. Okello quickly formed a coalition government consisting of his followers and several armed rebel groups, and they agreed to a peace deal. But Museveni's National Resistance Army refused to cooperate. They continued their attacks, capturing citizens in western and southern Uganda. And in 1986, they captured Kampala. Both Obote and Okello fled into exile, and Museveni quickly formed a new government with himself as president. He was sworn in on 29 January 1986, and on that day, he promised a return to democracy. In his inaugural speech, he said, "The people of Africa, the people of Uganda are entitled to a democratic government. It is not a favor from any regime. The sovereign people must be the public, not the government." He further stated that this is not a mere change of guard, it is a fundamental change. The change that Uganda's people were yearning for is here. Democracy is here too. Their power to vote is finally here. Unfortunately, they will soon realize that a vote cast does not mean a vote counted. The government can take the form of a democracy, but in reality, it is nowhere near what a democracy institution looked like. The Ugandans learned the hard way. The question is, what happened to this vibrant revolutionary? How can a man define a problem so perfectly and still turn out to be that problem? The surprising thing is that President Museveni started very well. Immediately he was sworn in as president, he began a number of economic reforms. He adopted IMF and World Bank structural adjustment program. He began trade liberalization, privatization of state enterprises, and stabilizing the state currency. The result was a sudden economic turnaround. The war had devastated the Ugandan economy and left many citizens poor and unemployed. But the reforms came just in time for Uganda. From 1990 to 2000, the country's GDP growth rate averaged 6.8%. Between 1992 and 2005, the poverty rate plummeted to 31% from 52%. He made significant effort to encourage women to attend college and even had a female vice president for nearly a decade. He introduced free primary education, and in 1996, he organized an election as he had promised to the people of Uganda. He won that election in a landslide victory, winning over 75% of the vote cast. Although the opposition candidates claimed that the election was rigged, democracy had returned. And that is the important thing for Ugandans at the moment. Besides, their president was doing really well. But something interesting happened between Museveni and his longtime personal doctor. The two were close since the days of the Bush War. However, shortly after the 2001 election, they had a fallout when Kizza Besigye decided to contest in the elections. The election campaign was so fierce that Museveni promised to put his opponent 6 feet under. Museveni was announced as the winner of the election, but Kizza challenged the result in court. While the court agreed that there was electoral malpractice, they voted against annulment of the result. During his campaign for this election, Museveni promised he will not be contesting again. The truth is that, by the constitution, he was not allowed to contest again. The president was permitted only 2 tenures, and he had exhausted all of them. In 2005, Museveni signed a bill that removed presidential term limits, thereby making him eligible to contest the next election. He had tasted power and he did not want to let go. He contested the election again in 2006 and won. He did it again in 2011 and won. He did it in 2016 and won. He had his grip on power and he employed every arsenal to make sure he crushed his opposition. On several occasions, he arrested and imprisoned Kizza Besigye with charges ranging from possession of illegal firearms to treason. He did all he could to silence the opposition. The last straw that broke the camel back was signing the constitutional amendment which removed age limit to presidential candidates. The constitution had an age limit of between 35 and 75 years for anybody contesting for president. Yoweri Museveni will be 76 by the next election and he needed to do away with that. But by that time, many Ugandans were tired of his oppressive regime. The police and the army had become state tools for oppressing citizens, and any critique is considered a threat to the government. The Ugandan Law Society challenges amendment in court. But you see, for a president that has been in power for that long, it only means one thing: he owns the court and even the parliament. In fact, to appease the parliamentary members, he increased their term limit from 5 years to 7 years. Museveni was a master of his game. His government has soon become full of loyalists. No amount of protest against the change shifted him. The change stood and he contested the 2021 election. 2021 elections are probably the most interesting in Uganda's history. It drew attention both locally and internationally. The major contestants were Museveni and the popular Ugandan pop star Bobi Wine. The campaign was fierce and Museveni did everything he could to suppress Bobi Wine. By now, nothing he did mattered again. Majority of Ugandan youths love Bobi Wine and they were yearning for change. No Ugandan under the age of 35 had witnessed another president other than Museveni. They were tired and they found a suitable candidate in Bobi Wine. Unfortunately for Bobi, the campaign came during the COVID-19 lockdown. Public gatherings were not allowed. And when Museveni opened the country for campaign, he enforced stringent rules that even his campaign could not follow. Bobi Wine was threatened, arrested, imprisoned, and even his driver was killed. Museveni did all he could to stop Bobi. He even arrested all his campaign team, and on the day of election, he placed the country in a complete internet blackout. Bobi Wine was placed on house arrest with helicopters hovering around his compound. And finally, Museveni was declared the winner of 2021 election. These elections were neither free nor fair, but it does not matter. Ugandans wanted democracy. They can have their democracy, but Museveni is sure not releasing the power to them. He does not only hold power, he has since converted the country to a family dynasty, sharing political appointment to family members as though it was their family inheritance. His wife Janet Museveni is the Minister of Education. His son General Muhoozi is the Chief of Uganda's Defense Forces. His cousin Bride holds a Minister for Animal Industry. His daughter Nashasha works as one of his presidential assistants. The list keeps going on. There are over 15 relatives of Museveni holding critical government positions in Uganda. There are over 49 million people in Uganda today. Yet the most qualified people for top government position are his family members. What a better way to solve the African problem. Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, a vibrant revolutionary, he defined clearly what the problem of Africa is, and he did that both in words and in deed. He's truly the perfect definition of the problem of Africa. He's an example of what a true revolutionary should never become. A good dancer must know when to leave the stage. Museveni is clearly not a good one. Will he be willing to relinquish power when his tenure expires in 2026? The answer is almost no. Already, he's promising Ugandans again that this contest of 2026 election will be his last one. Will it really be his last one? We don't know. All we know is we wish Uganda the very best, and Museveni seems to be standing in the way. Thank you for watching this episode. If you enjoyed it, please like, comment, and share with your friends. Till I see you again, bye bye.